Ladies and gentlemen, in today's conversation, we're going to talk about the value of understanding different ways to approach financial growth. Now, I'm not a financial expert, so I had a great guest come onto the podcast and talk about his personal experience, his background, and not necessarily strategies or stocks you should invest in, but the way you should change your perception based off the current political climate and understanding the economy, understanding how you should look at the stock market, and understanding how you should perceive your own financial enrichment. So, this is not one of those pyramid schemes where I'm trying to sell you a course, but it's a free flowing conversation and understanding how people's perception could mislead them and not being able to create the best environment for their own financial growth. It's really kind of focusing on the ways people look at the world in general. It's a very good conversation. Hopefully, you guys do come out of it getting a lot of great information. You can find all my guest information in the description. With that said, I do hope you guys enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the Purple Political Breakdown. How's it going? How's your day been? We are back at it again. Ladies and gentlemen, I have another excellent guest episode to talk about some political solutions, some tips, just have a fruitful, a very good conversation. Now, I do want to preface this. I probably already said this before, but I'm going to remind people that I'm changing my upload schedule for these guest episodes from Thursday till Wednesday, 8 a.m. EST. So for today, we're going to be discussing financial strategies, and I am curious to see how we kind of dive into this conversation, especially in regards to people's perception of the political climate. So I'm curious to see what he says. I'm curious to see how we dive into it. So as it sounds, I have a great guest, and my guest Will. So I'm going to allow him to introduce himself, tell the people what he's about, and give a little background on what his background is as well. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Will Young. My background has been in the financial services industry the last 22 years. What makes me different is how I see the world since I was a young child. I've always kind of seen things very black and white, numbers, letters, and that led me to really study human nature, why people behave the way they do. And it's led me down this path from the early stages of Socrates asking, what is courage? And courage is a different definition for different people. Courage could be running in the battle, and a courage could be standing up for what's right. These are the basics of how we agree on things. We need to agree on the definitions and many other layers. And that led me to the Stoicism, which I'm a devout Stoic, which is the early stages of cognitive behavioral therapy to control our emotions, because our emotions drive most of us. And I was born with a lot of no emotions, I should say, or how do I word that correctly? And I've always searched, why do people behave this way? Because I didn't. I saw things and I'm on the spectrum. So it was different for me. And it led me to what is today now called the cognitive sciences or neuroscience, or oftentimes called behavioral finance, behavioral psychology. Really, the forefront of that was designed by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, who won a Nobel laureate in 2002 for behavioral economics, because people don't make rational decisions on many things, whether it's sports, whether it's politics, or in my area of expertise is finances. We want to buy at the top and sell at the bottom. That has been since the beginning of time. We want to jump on when everybody wants it and when all of our other friends. So that's where I'm at. And I have a process, and I'm developing that process, putting it in a book to help people cut out the noise and focus on what the process is to make these decisions. Because everything process based will allow you to make the smartest decisions possible for your situation. So it's not about picking the right stock. It's about the process you use to make the best decisions for yourself. And once you have a process driven situation, then you're going to have better outcomes over your life in defining your goals. So that's my goal, to be in front of people and share that wisdom with people.
All right, that sounds very good. I definitely respect that approach. I definitely find myself leaning very much so more on like the more logical, less emotional side as well. But there needs to be, for people like that who consider themselves potentially emotionless, as you said, there needs to be a recognition that also, like you said, the majority of the people do live through their emotions. They live through another term people use all the time, through their instincts. So
Yes.
you got to really understand that in order to resonate and connect with people. So I respect this approach because sometimes people X's and O's all the time. I'm like, bro, this person doesn't care about your X's and O's. That's not how they feeling right now. So
That's
we'll
exactly
definitely
right.
dive into that. Before we get into all that stuff, and I'm sure we could deep dive and break that stuff down, what is your political background? This is obviously a more political, social, cultural, really focused on trying to help people understand this stuff and talk about solutions. Of course, I give my personal opinions based off my values all the time, but I do think when I have these conversations with people, and that's why I say this every podcast episode, it's important to recognize that you can have a fluid, important, rational, solution based conversation regardless of political identity. I've talked to so many different types of people, but what is your political background? What's your political identity? Kind of give that for us.
Well, I hear this a lot. I am a progressive. The day after AOC won her primary about 6 years ago or 8 years ago, I guess about 8 years ago, I started donating to her because it's the first time I really felt like people were understanding how things really work and how money works. And I've been a progressive. I just never really pushed that narrative when I was younger. And I do understand, and this is what gives me perspective. When I was 20, 21, 22, a young male, you hear people saying, get up, work for yourself, do this, work. But then if you start to go deeper and you get older, because you should get wiser over time, you start to learn that things aren't so simple. And there, a lot of the game is rigged. There isn't meritocracy. When you find out Harvard, 32, 33% of Harvard acceptance or people that go there are basically from because their parents went there. That isn't the best. You're telling me if there's 400 in the class out of 340 million people, the best, it's not possible. So you start to learn all these things are not the way they're supposed to be. And why is it that someone like Elon Musk gets $5 billion in subsidies for Tesla, or Amazon builds a warehouse and they get a massive subsidy, but all the local businesses don't? So they're competing against a $1 trillion company with no tax breaks. That's when you start to realize things are rigged and you need to make things more balanced to have a middle class. And a middle class, if you really think about this, is new. Go all through history. There's never been a time where there was a middle class. You had the wealthy, the poor, slaves, the serfs, whatever, indentured servants, and you had some people. But only really after World War II did a lot of nations start to develop a middle class, and they had much higher tax rates. It's all through human history. You had very wealthy people and people kind of on the bottom. But since then, we slowly eroded the tax base. And the people who got the best benefit, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, often don't pay any taxes at all. Yet, have you ever seen their trucks on the road? Yeah, once or twice maybe. They're not paying for the roads, the bridges, the schools, or anything else. So that money doesn't filter through. So I started to really notice this, and a lot of that's happened since the 80s. And when you get older and you realize how money flows through the system, it's just money. But you can't convince people otherwise. So I'm a devout progressive. And I don't want to take up too, I want to explain this. There's a book called Why Nations Fail. I've read it 9 times. And it explains inclusive versus extractive, egalitarian versus authoritarian, vicious versus virtuous cycles, and the critical drift or institutional drift, and how things happened and made things better for people. And that book actually last November won a Nobel laureate for in economics explaining this, but it had been out for 10 years because people oftentimes, when something new comes to us, we reject it because it's new. We're like, that can't be true. It can't be that easy. it's just human nature to do that. Anything new. And now, just like when the 3-point line has become the major thing now in basketball, 10 years ago, they'll never shoot the 3-point line. Now you're like, who does it? You got to have a 7'2" guy shoot the three. We always reject what's new. The league will be 50-50 passing in NFL. Now you have people running and passing, and it just things change, and it takes time for people. So that's why I use the behavioral psychology behind this. But in simple put, I'm a progressive. I understand how these things work, how the global economies work, and I understand how the language can be framed to make people think a certain thing. And that's where I want to share my story and how to get through this with a process, a written process.
That's interesting. I've never heard someone outright just say, and when you broke it down, because when you initially said the middle class never exists, or you didn't say that, you said the middle class for the most part didn't exist throughout human history.
Correct.
And when you initially said that, I was like, but then you said after World War II, it's a brand new concept. Like, oh yeah, I agree. And one of the biggest thing when it comes down to something that I tell people in this podcast episode all the time, and it's unfortunate we're not focusing on that because of at the very least, I'll say ever since Donald Trump basically entered the political scene, we haven't been focused on wealth inequality. And I 100% think that we should really be focusing on wealth inequality. So I'm glad you brought that up. I thought that was interesting. So before we kind of get into the big time informational dump in the political and financial rhetoric, what is a hobby you have that makes you relatable to the average person? Something that the average person does, enjoys, frequents. What's something like that? Maybe because you started talking about basketball, I was like, oh, okay, maybe it's basketball, but what is that?
All right. When I was a young man, I loved sports. My dream was to be a sports journalist, broadcaster, something along those lines. That's what I loved it. But I started to develop and say, there's something else I like. Sports, politics, and finance are all the same. You have people who make predictions constantly, often wrong, seldom in doubt. I call them articulate incompetence. They're going to go into the game and they're going to do this and then you forget that they've been wrong 20 times in a row, whether it's a stock, whether it's politics, and just like we're hearing with it 2 weeks away. I'm like, come on. Or because people don't go back and fact check things. That's always been a haunting thing for me because I get people saying, I heard this stock's good or that. I'm like, let's go back to the messenger and let's look at their Breyer score. Now, I know people don't they go, Breyer score, what's that? Breyer score is a mathematical equation on forecasting. And that's something you do. And big banks as an example, and I'm going to wind this back. JP Morgan got more resources than anybody else on earth, biggest bank on earth. They were predicting a negative year in 2024. I think the market was like up 20, 22, 23%. Again, then the next year and the next week, they're like, I love JP Morgan. They gave great advice. I'm like, they've been wrong like 7 years in a row. That's what's always fascinated me. So that's my sport. It's the sport of the forecasters, whether it's sports, politics, or finance. And that's what became my sport. It does not make friends all the time, but it does make me humble to realize that it's very difficult to forecast. And there are a lot of challenges because most people take an inside view, not an outside view. You need to look outside and then you look inside. That's why you get these great team dynamics now with teams not having superstars playing in the NBA. You're seeing team dynamics, young players. It's a young man's game, period. You don't get 35-year-old guys winning these. You get young guys winning them. And again, all the people who forecasted at the beginning of the year, how many forecasted these two teams? Not many.
That's very fair. I will say the Thunder obviously had at the very least some leeway. First seed last season, of course.
Very good team. Very good team.
Nobody predicted the Pacers. I mean, I'm deep in the NBA. Yeah. I had them losing basically every round. I was like, they're losing to the Bucks, they're losing to the Cavs, they're losing to the Knicks, and now they might win the finals. So hey, they got
grit. And that's what's hard to measure is their determination to play hard. And ultimately, it's a young man's game. You're not at your best at 36. You can't be running up and down. And you've seen it with Kevin Durant. Now, I don't, but great player. But then he gets all these young guys chasing him constantly. And it's not a Tuesday night or a Friday night. He doesn't perform as well because you got all the energy in the world at 23, 24, 25. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You do. You just do. You just don't get tired when you're now. When you get older, you get tired. I mean, if I have a glass of wine, I'm like, oh my God, I'm 52. You just change. And it makes it easier because people don't like to see their stars deteriorate, but it's human nature. And that's the same with companies, stocks. And again, I'm not recommending it. IBM's never going to, not be Big Blue. Well, or General Electric is never going to be, or Exxon. There's constant change, and we have to. It's always going to happen. It's a circle of life in all companies and everything else. And that's what got me into this: is the forecasting and learning about people's poor record and why people listen to them. And it's often because they have extreme confidence, but no competence. And I don't understand why that is. I've never understood that.
Yeah, there's some very, very good points. I agree. I've actually had this take when I was talking sports with some people I know, and the game is definitely changing. More team oriented for sure.
Yes.
Where you can go 12 deep in your bench. It's a different dynamic. But with that said, shout out. Sports is very entertaining. Definitely like sports as well. I'm sure you guys heard me talk about it. I talked about Caitlin Clark recently. Hey, she's big time. Shout out Caitlin Clark. With that said, let's kind of dive into the conversation. Now, I think the best way to break this down, because I'm kind of interested in your perception, and then we'll kind of dive into the strategies that you were referring to earlier on in this conversation, is people's perception of the world and how that plays into potentially why or why not they are not abiding by, I won't say simplistic, but at the very least, fruitful financial strategies for them in particular. Because right now, a lot of people are complaining about the economy. Well, let me take a step back. Ever since COVID, people have been complaining about the economy, saying that it's terrible, it's bad, and all that stuff. And, I did, when I was talking about it, I did bring up the aspect of, yeah, it's bad. Pandemic, it's hurting everybody around the world. America's still doing better than every other country, though.
That is true. Yes. But they don't care about the facts.
Exactly.
It's
So
a feeling.
I want to ask you to kind of touch into that. Why do you believe people's perception of the economy dictates so much of how they handle their own financial situation? Why do you believe that they look outside on what the world and what the political climate and the economic climate is telling them versus what they're doing individually as a person who has money or whatever, deals with their own finances?
This is a deep and evolved question.
I do apologize for interrupting this great podcast episode, but I have a question for you. Did you know you can support this show by downloading and becoming a member of the Alive Podcast Network app? You'll experience unlimited access to Black-hosted content, and we'll be able to keep bringing you amazing content week after week. If you enjoy what I'm doing, then I'm sure you're going to enjoy a bunch of other creators as well by downloading this app, of course. So without further ado, after you're done watching and being entertained with today's news or conversation, make sure you guys go download the Alive Network app now.
It's very much no different than social media or TV. There's a study that's been going since the 50s, and they always ask people, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm doing okay, but I don't think everyone's doing okay. So you'll find out like they're negative on the economy. I don't know, remember the exact number. It might be 60 or 70% of people are always negative on the economy. Yet in their situation, 70% of them are positive on the situation because they're looking at them and saying, I'm doing okay. I got food on my table. I got health care. They're looking outward. So there's this disconnect between reality and then their reality. Their reality is okay. And a lot of us are doing okay. Granted, we don't have money saved up for expenses like if the car goes up or a health benefit. that doesn't mean it's okay. I'm just kind of generalizing here. If you're 26 years old and things are tight, you're not getting sick a lot. But we often are looking and thinking other people must not, because the news sells one thing: advertising. That's it. And when you're on CNN, you'll have a guy who's just on there lying the whole time. And they have him paid to come on every week because they think it's good to have arguments. It's nothing positive. They're not talking about wealth inequality. They're not talking about inflation. They're just saying, what did President so and so do? Or let's write a book on Biden. I'm like, Biden's done and gone. It's over. Like, they just can't stop gossiping. And that gossip is what filters into people's heads. So most people will spend more time, especially men, looking at buying a car than they will looking at their finances.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll say, I don't have any time. I don't have any money for that. And then they'll go out and buy, season tickets for something. So we have no issue with that. But they're not really looking at things objectively because it's hard. And we don't want to look introspection into ourselves and say, well, I'm not doing as good as I had hoped, or I haven't saved as much, because that's a conversation a lot of us don't want to have with ourselves. And that's a hard conversation to have. But the reality in this is people tend to be much more negative about other people than themselves. And inflation, we did give people a lot of money, but about $5 trillion went to corporations, and those corporations hoarded the money.
Mm-hmm.
And the profit margin increased for corporations to an all-time high, meaning they took more. So if the US government prints $1 trillion and they get 65% rather than 60, then their wealth keeps growing. And I think one of the things that we're seeing now is the inflation was high. So when people go to the store, there's only like two things they really talk about: gas prices for some reason, and food.
Yeah.
And gas is really inexpensive if you went back the last 30 years, 20 in rolling periods, relative. It just hasn't really, it's kind of bounced around, but it went up because obviously Russia invaded Ukraine. That was but that has nothing to do with the other stuff. But energy prices in terms of natural gas are very low. But people don't, you're not driving past a store, a farm store, Wawa, whatever they are, with the natural gas prices every day past you. But you see the other one. And so that doesn't, even though that is a major component, heating your house, air conditioning, you don't think of that. And that's why, because it's not readily available. It's called the availability heuristic. When something's readily in your face, you think it's more likely to be prevalent. Like if now you're seeing shark attacks now because it's summer, there's very few shark attacks. But they're like, oh my God, shark. It's just because that's what the media is talking about, and it keeps your eyes to it.
That was a really potent analogy when you brought up shark attacks. Because people have said this before, that obviously when I was younger, I thought sharks were so dangerous. Or same thing with spiders. I thought sharks and spiders were so dangerous. Come to find out, you're more than likely never going to get hurt by a shark. A lot of them are not going out of their way to eat humans. Shout out Jaws for making a whole generation of people thinking that all these creatures are the most dangerous things in the world. But a lot of it is driven by media. And this actually proliferates a point based off what you were talking about, which adds upon this current climate, is imagine a movie defining a whole fear for generations to come. Now, imagine something like that every single day, social media.
Yes.
So social media has done something very interesting where I think oftentimes people are fed wrongful information all the time based off media outlets like you mentioned, and also social media influencers as well, kind of reinforcing it. And other aspect,
and then the algorithm on that just keeps.
Yeah, and I've talked the algorithm at first was like, oh yeah, it gives you what you want. It's like, all right, but now it's kind of doing something a little potentially nefarious in how it's creating these, social circles of ideology.
Yes.
And the other aspect about it is that it is constantly showcasing a lifestyle you'll never have. with social media content creators, because a lot of them these people watch, money, having fun, doing all this crazy stuff, crazy cars. Like, yeah, you would see that in the movie, but you're able to detach. My assumption is because of the relatability aspect, even though you should not relate to content creators, but because they seem more human and more personable, people start thinking that should be me. That should be me. I should have all of that. And because I'm not, there must be something wrong with society. So
it is definitely true. Like a Tom Cruise, like, he's like a star, big deal. That's Tom Cruise jumping off buildings, Jackie Chan, whatever. I'm not going to be him or The Rock. But now you're like, oh, I could be this. And you're seeing so many people with becoming famous, but not necessarily have any talent or any value to add. And you're right. That is a very great observation. I'm not very few. It's like, I want to be Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, because you just weren't born that way, or Julia Roberts, or, just there's so many people. Tyler Perry's so talented, or, there's all these different people that come out. Kevin Hart, like you see, that's not the same as a social media influencer where you think you can just be famous. It's a completely different thing, because they worked on their craft for a long time in the background. Lonely nights for Dave Chappelle, standing there with nobody there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then you come across other people who don't know what they're talking about, but just getting, a lot of following. With that said, I do think that is very interesting how, when you really look at it throughout history, and you could just say that it's getting intensified through different factors that we've mentioned already, how people are so black-pilled with like how everything is and their financial situation, so to speak, even though, like you said, they're okay. Of course, it could be better. No one's denying that, but they're okay. With that said, when you look at these people, or when you're talking to these type of people who have this kind of black-pilled mindset of the economic / financial world, how do you communicate with them? How do you resonate with them? What is ways you try to not necessarily change their mind, but give them a different perspective?
Okay, so when Trump won the first time, I was in the mode of gaining this type of deep knowledge. I had been working at it for years. And I knew that when you bring something up, there's 4 parts to this. This is really important. It's called cultural cognition bias. When we grow up, we learn about things. I grew up like in Hillbillyville. I had a goat and all this stuff. And that just seemed normal to me. We had a dirt road. We didn't have sidewalks. We didn't have streetlights. Like, that was normal. When you grow up like that, you assume everybody else is like that. And someone who isn't is different. And we naturally kind of like, that's, you don't have something in common with them. And that is something that is how you form your identity. And the moment you find somebody who's grew up like you, even if you don't necessarily agree on a million other things, you'll say, oh, he grew up like me. Oh, he understands. That's really important bias. The second part of that bias, and this is, you have to ask questions, is identity protective cognition bias. This is when someone says, oh, you must have been a hillbilly or this and that. I guess I was, but you automatically get defensive. And you start to put your hands up. So if someone believes something and has a worldview, you can't come at their worldview like that, because now their perception, which is based on naive-realism, which is a bias, that's how you perceive things, because you learned it. And now your perception is one way. That's all you've ever known. And you've grown up this way. And that's where we reinforce our beliefs. Someone tells you that's wrong, or you can't do this, or whatever the case. And then lastly, it's the amplification. So I have to figure out a little bit about their background first so that I can understand. That's why I gave you those 4 pillars. Once you understand a little bit more about them, they'll say, oh, I lived here in the city. Or if I was a military brat and I traveled around, they're much more diverse. They've been overseas here. They're going to think differently because they've seen the world, versus somebody who, most of us, 80% of us, just stay in our same zip code our whole lives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I work in DC and I live in Baltimore. You look down my street, you got every race, every religion, creed. That's America. But when you leave America, if you notice, everybody's looks the same, kind of. I mean, that's unless even in Europe, it's still like mostly white. I mean, the highest population outside of just being European is France. I think it's like 10 or 11%. But everywhere you go outside of here is different. So it's culture shock. The point I'm making is I first have to ask them some questions, get to know them a little bit. What are their goals, their values? People, it's attitudes, beliefs, and values. Your attitude is how you feel. Your belief is a little bit more stronger, let's say, but your values are really important to you. And a lot of people align their values. There's two types of people. And this is the second major factor. And I do this right away. And I can already tell with you, you're an egalitarian. It's the first thing I notice. There's strict father-parent model, meaning, you know this, you grow up and it's parents over kids, husband over wife. Doesn't mean it's perfectly rigid like this. Man over the environment, man over animals, corporations over people, God over this. And you just kind of follow that. But egalitarian, you'll see a lot of us arguing about things where we just don't fall in line, because you'll have the most macho people supposedly listening to a guy who isn't very macho, let's say, and you're talking about how tough you are, but then you get upset about 100. You're worried about where someone pees, or you're worried about this or that, and so they follow this strict father-parent model. They want to be told what to do, and then they do it. And that's kind of how I can figure people out. And egalitarian is more open-minded. They're like, I don't care if you dye your hair blue or you have a nose ring. I think they look horrible, but I don't care. It has no bearing on me. I just don't care. You got a face tattoo or neck. I love tattoos, but I don't care. I hate that little nose ring right here. My sister got it. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh my God, sister, why? But I don't care. I'm not going to be offended. But a lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't do this. I'm like, it's them. So you identify people, and then you can kind of figure out how to ask them questions. And the first question, might be, what's important to you, or what are you looking to do, or tell me your story about how you arrived here, because then they'll naturally open up to you. And one of the most powerful things that I learned, and this is Chris Voss, and I study a lot. He does a great job with this. People often are a little afraid to speak to you. So if you lean in and you go, it seems like, it feels like maybe something, and I don't actually say it, people they'll answer it for you, because you're not going, tell me what are you not telling me? Like, that doesn't work. Just like you just said, calm down has worked 100% of the time with every woman I've ever spoke to, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell your wife or girlfriend to calm down. It works 100% of the time. I promise you. And so that's what you read people, and then you kind of navigate them through it, because they have to take this journey through their mind themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can start to open up their mind to how you're going to do it. Because a lot of people thought when Trump won, is going to be the dawn of a new day. And this time around, tariffs aren't taxes, and trade and all. And so I've had to overcome some of these, but I had to get them. What is your process to do this? Could you explain the process you use to form your beliefs? Is a question I always ask. Can you identify your confidence level on a scale of 1 to 10? And they'll say, well, I'm a 9. Okay, why not 10? And then they've never been asked. So you're not challenging somebody on the actual topic. You're challenging them on the process they use. And when you start to do this and you're not attacking them, you're just asking them genuinely as a friend, explain your process to me. And then the light bulb comes on for the first time, because they've never had to think about it. They were told, buy this, do this, that's what it is. And that's when you start to get the opening of, I'm not really sure, that's why I hired you. Or, okay, well, let's talk about this a little bit more. How do you evaluate me? Is it for accuracy goals? And then you start getting them, because now you get the emotion coming out and they're thinking, oh God, he's asking me questions. I like this. And you've eliminated all the noise around you, because you're actually focused on them. And now you can have a real conversation. And most people have something called an effective tipping point. Now, this is generic, so please bear with me. 30%, you get to a 30% number, you'll start to flip a lot of people. Just like if someone tells you they're never going to shoot threes. And then you find out the Warriors, that's the team. Yeah. The Warriors were shooting a ton of threes. Now everybody shoots more threes than the Warriors. You wouldn't believe that. But then when enough people start to believe it, or you get to an effective tipping point, a lot of us are like, of course, they were always going to shoot threes. Everybody knew that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But some people will still go on and say, I hate that. I don't like. And those people you're never going to convince. They usually just fade out.
Mhm.
And you're always going to have them. And that's the same in political discourse. They're just not going to buy Apple. How many people? I know so many people said, I will never have one of these. Bill, you're an idiot. Some of my friends call me Bill or Billy, but Will is how I'm known. Why would you wait in line for this? 10 years later, they're like, of course I was getting that. Did I say that? And so, it's gradually then suddenly. So that's kind of where you have to figure out, how do you want to bring someone up? How do you want to because I was buying chip stocks in the index before AI. And I would explain to them that they're in cars. They're in all of our cars. They're in our refrigerators. They're everywhere. Like a car has like thousands of them. They're like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. It's crazy. And I said, we're just going to need more. It's just the way it is. Pretty soon we'll have glasses with it, and we do now. But the point I'm making is you have to tell them a story and a narrative based on them. And people like stories. They don't like being told. But if you share a story, you've seen this. Someone tells you a great story. It doesn't matter. You're leaning in like, come on, tell, right? It's just our nature. We love great storytelling. And so I've learned to be a better storyteller. Like there's a story, the greatest volcano eruption in history was in Indonesia. It threw so much ash up, half of the globe was in darkness. A lot of people died. A lot of horses died. A lot of famine because you need sunlight. This was also a time when a young boy in Germany saw all this famine and stuff. He goes, I want to figure out a way to help people. That was a critical juncture for him. So he went, studied chemistry, and is the one that found out that nitrogen fertilizer is how you can grow faster food. So we stopped having famines in that sense. Or they started riding more bicycles then because horses were dying, and you can't ride a horse. If you had a choice between your food and their food, it's your food. So there's these little tiny things, and here people are like, really, and now they're kind of like, oh, okay, he's an expert. He knows about financials and agriculture and stories. And that's what I share with people, because I'm not going to win them over telling them they're wrong, because that's a meaningless conversation. Now I just told you a story, and it's like, really, it really happened. It's crazy how things happen and we don't even know it. Or the third largest export of the United States in the 1850s, this is going to blow your mind, was ice. Now think about this for a second. You went in Chicago, they invented ice. So you had to take ice, you had to ship it on trains, and then you had to put it on a boat. So you put water inside a boat. Now imagine telling everybody, you're totally fine. I know I put all the water inside the boat, but it would only melt so fast because it was big blocks of ice. And we just don't know the history. And these are like critical junctures where we were inventing things were happening. And I like to share stories like that because they're not political. They're based on knowledge. And hey, I don't know if ice was a major turning point. We didn't have to put stuff in the ground or salt it. Chips could be that, or the phone could be that. Like, and who didn't want ice? Some people were like, I don't ever want ice. I like salt. Again, you're never going to convince them, so you just leave them be. But these types of stories are important to tell people because there's so many amazing stories that we can't believe. I don't need fictional books. I just can read history.
I'm with you. I completely coincide with these ways to communicate with people and try to relate to them because it's so valuable. Oftentimes, when it comes to me on this podcast, there's only two times in particular when it comes to I'll probably call them MAGA individuals that came
fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I'm a stoic. Tell them how it is.
Hey man, I don't remember if they outright called themselves MAGA, but based off their rhetoric and based off obviously supporting Donald Trump, I think it's fine. So one person talked about immigration, the inefficiencies with immigration. We had a conversation with that, and the other person talked about, the better way to choose candidates. And in both those conversations, one guy, we had some disagreements when it comes to certain things about the perceptions of immigration, and then I just broke it down very simply: ask questions, try to open his mind a little bit, and I was able to get him to agree hesitantly, but I was able to get him to agree that what if we made the immigration process smoother and just allow more people in? And at first he was like, but the whole issue, well, it's a supposed issue for a lot of people who are MAGA, is we don't want illegal immigrants, even though I think people mischaracterize illegal. I think
They do.
But
They don't understand it. Correct. And
yeah,
then you get off topic. And that, what you just said, is common. They do what's called misdirection, deflection, divergence, pattern interrupt, or red herrings into the conversations. And then you never get to so you really have to say, let's stay on this point. So again, carry on, please.
yeah, exactly. So was able to ask questions, finally gave him the answer, and eventually got him to the place where hopefully we could agree that yeah, there may be inefficiencies, but immigration's still okay, right? Now that happened before Donald Trump was president. That's probably a year and so ago. The current sentiment is very different, I would argue, in terms of immigration in general now. But that was very important. And then the recent conversation I had with someone, we talked about it, and one of the big contentious issues is his perception of DEI. And I was finally able to break it down. It's like, hey, wouldn't it make sense if there's a organization, a group that constantly hires his friends that typically have more wealth, that typically are white men, that it would be fair if other people who don't have as many resources? Finally able to break it down, finally get him able, okay, it makes sense. No, actually, he said, well, maybe they should sue. Maybe they should do something. I was like, yeah, it's called DEI. Like that's what they
Yes.
did it for. They did it so they could get DEI. So the only reason why I brought those two stories up is because it tells you that sometimes you are able to have conversations with people and then try to help them understand that it's just a perception thing. Once we really get to the foundation, not saying these solutions are perfect, because that doesn't exist, but foundationally, like, we probably agree if we care about the people. The only tough thing about it nowadays, because face-to-face conversations, this conversation, very valuable. Phone call conversation, very valuable. Social media detaches those conversations very often.
Yes. What you just said is very critical. That is the effective tipping point. When you meet somebody, there's different ways. You can do motivational interviewing, street epistemology, or what's very helpful, it's called the elaboration likelihood model, where most people take the peripheral route. You want them to take the central route, which requires thinking. However, their identity is tied to this group. So your social group is very important. I'm not in a fraternity. I always wondered why people would do crazy stuff, but I've had a lot of friends in fraternities, and we've been at parties before, and they're like, everyone do a shot or something. I'm like, oh my God, I'm drunk. Everybody's drunk. We're all thinking no more. But yet all 100 of us do it because we all want to fall in line. That's social proof, and called, I lost my train of thought. It's not de-individuation, group polarization. No, I totally blanked on this, but it's a very common thing. We wind up doing it, and 90% of us disagree with it, but we go with it because we're in that moment. And that happens a lot.
Yeah.
And that's why you can get people one-on-one. And I know a lot of good people who aren't racist, who made poor choices on this, but then I know a lot who are. And I get taken for a Trump supporter because of where I grew up and how I look. And even a hobby you asked, my favorite hobby is surfing. I love surfing. And I was in Costa Rica. I was with Juan, and we're out there in the water. And he goes, "Are you a Trump supporter?" I was like, "Juan, this is our 10th time surfing. You damn well know I'm not." He's like, "Well, I was just double checking." I was like, "No." But anyway, it is funny. but that's my hobby. I love surfing. I love being in the water, and I use those characteristics. But you're right. Great conversations can be had when someone is relaxed. Riddell, that's a perfect way to talk to somebody, but we don't have enough of them. And then the media, Fox or any of these, or they poison the well at the top. They're poisoning the water, the drinking water that flows down the mountain. And by doing that, the people who drink in it, even if they get away from the well, they come back to the well and they're hearing it again and they're like, well, that made sense, but now, and that's why people get so polarized with the group polarization.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Sometimes, I always have to step back trying to communicate with all the different people that I end up talking to for the comment section. And, some people agree, then some people I'm like, no matter how logically, no matter what I say, you are not going to change your mind. So you just gotta, sometimes it's not worth the energy, unfortunate as it sounds. And it takes some extreme circumstance to finally realize, oh man. And we're kind of entering a very kind of situation like that right now with the stuff with Iran. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. But kind of back into the forefront of the conversation we're having. Everybody kind of perceives things a certain way. A lot of people are black pilled in terms of the world. Some people may be getting more positive, but it's hard to with the tariffs, with the big beautiful bill that's not beautiful at all. So many different things that are going to affect the economy moving forward. The getting rid of a lot of immigrants has taken a lot of labor for a lot of people's corporations and such. So when you, as of right now, when you're talking to a person, when you're kind of explaining how they can kind of go about this climate, now after you broke down everything, they try to get them into a maybe understandable foundation. What are some financial strategies? What type of advice are you giving these individuals?
Okay. The way I do everything, and I do compete in what's called the Good Judgment Project, Super Forecasters by Philip Tedlock. So I have a track record on a lot of this stuff, the accuracy. People would prefer to be wrong in a group than be right by themselves, because people really want to be a part of an identity, a social identity. And that's one thing I've worked very hard to gain, because I felt lost all my life. I felt very lost with that. And I hope that I resonate with people. Now, I follow the money. That's it. And I look for critical junctures where things happen. When you look at money, we're seeing a flow of money go from dollars to euros. The dollar has weakened by more than 10% very rapidly, one of the 15th greatest moves in history. That isn't Will saying, hey, that is, it's like the water turned and went right at you and you're getting the hose and you're saying, oh, it's not the hose. I'm not getting wet. And you can explain that to people. They'll look at you like, but I thought that. I'm like, what percentage of trade does the US do with the UK, or total? And someone's like, I don't know, 20%. I'm like, it's 3%. And the majority of that is Bentleys. And how many do you need? And they're like, really? I'm like, what percentage is with China? Now, this blows people away. Now, I know a lot of this stuff, but just me telling them, it's about 13.5%. It's not as much as you think. So China sells 87% of their stuff to places that aren't the US. So they're going to be okay more than we are, because and people don't know this. They just think screaming and hollering tough rhetoric. That's why you've had tariffs on, tariffs off constantly, because nobody's jumping to him. And now you now have Europe with 550 million people. You have Canada with about 35 million. I'm not sure Mexico. I should know that. Maybe 80 or 90 million, maybe. I'm not sure. I got to double check that. But you have our biggest trade partners, Canada and Mexico, and they have plenty of people they can trade with. And they'll just move it. Our fruits and vegetables, all these things, no one needs to negotiate with Trump because they're smarter than Trump. But you can't tell them they're smarter, because they'll keep telling me he's a great deal maker. And this is where you have to say, okay, no problem. So all I want you to do is help me out so that I can understand your perspective. Could you as the deals happen, can you give me each deal as they come out, and then just give me the process of how you're going to evaluate this? They're like, well, I just like it as topical. Well, I said, I don't use it as topical because it's my livelihood. It's how I make money. It's how I make investors money. So I don't want to have a topical conversation about something and then be right, 75% of the time. And you say, well, you're wrong, because I stay away from them. But when you come to finance, I follow the money. And one of the things I was concerned about, there's a big company, remind you of an orchard. And let's just say tariffs affect them because so much is made. But about 97% of the phone is not made in China. The parts all come outside. They put it together there. And one of the things Tim Cook said, or Tim Apple as he's known, he goes, it could cost us $900 million in additional costs.
Yeah.
But they have spent $500 billion buying stock back. So they're complaining about $900 million is like you and me complaining about a penny, while not worried about $1 million. Because all they care about is profit margin. So they buying their stock back hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, yet they're acting like 900 million, which is not a billion. And if they did it they're focused on the wrong things. All they care about is profit. And once he leaves, he doesn't care about the company. So I do like the idea of Trump saying it, but he hasn't done anything. And under Biden's administration, I did make buys under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I can't tell you who I bought, but let's just say when you're building things, you want to be in the places that have cement. And those types of bills, for every dollar the U.S. government put out, it's not spending, it's investing. They got $5 back. That's investment. So I often explain that to people. Okay, they gave $1 to Taiwan Semiconductor, which is in the United States. They cracked ground last February. It took them 7 months to make a 3-nanometer chip. If I'm correct, that's 15 atoms, which is crazy. And it's in the new iPhones. Now, that's the first time we've had a high quality plant. So you wanted to, let's say, buy something when that bill was passed, not 2 years later after everything's happened, because that's where you get the investment gain at the beginning. And that would have been, let's say, in 2022. And again, I'm not recommending these things, but when those bills happened, you had the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. I knew that if we spend $45 billion a year building things, then you might want to own companies that build things. And if we give them money, the factories there, the workers get the money, the factories, they have to buy steel from across the country. That money's going everywhere. People don't realize that $1 going there is $5 in growth. So FedEx is delivering stuff over. Now the planes are getting used. Boeing needs to build more planes because there's more traffic. All these things work together. We have to work together. We're all bees in the hive. And the better we work together, the better the hive is. That's what I try to explain to people, because we're so interconnected that you need cement going here. And then the guy who stops on the way, he's the guy going and eating at the diner, helping Marge or whoever is there. All these things are connected. So that $1 becomes $5 and that 1 trillion becomes 5 trillion. That's what builds America. And that's what flows through it. And that's when I start telling that story, people start to realize that. And that tax money from all that driving, all the roads, all the tolls, all these other things happening, generate tons of tax revenue. But you still got to have the people at the top pay taxes, ultimately. So that's how I do investing. I invest based on things like that, or critical things that happen, like Wells Fargo. This is a guarantee. Forgetting Trump, forget him for a second. There's always greedy CEOs 100% of the time. Can we agree on that? Yeah. CEOs love to steal money. Wells Fargo, 5 years ago, their CEO took a $250 million bonus, and they were making fake accounts for millions of people. Do you remember that? Look it up.
I didn't check that at that time.
It's crazy. The stock went from 50 to 20. Now, as long as the bank didn't go under, it was a good buy. Possibly a good buy, let's say. But then you have United Healthcare. Their CEOs stealing from Medicare. CEOs will always do stuff like that because greed is so inherent in those types of jobs. So I look at events or when Russia invades Ukraine, well, oil prices spike up. And if they go from, say, 50 to 150, maybe you don't want to own it anymore because that's crazy. And maybe you can look for. So these are the types of things that I look for, is that behaviors where people go, oh, Goldman Sachs puts a report out, it's going to 250. I'm like, well, Goldman Sachs has been wrong 20 out of 20 times. So do the opposite and you'll be okay. But it sounds good. And just like a lot of people thought Russia would have it over in 3 days, and it didn't. More people want to be in the collective group of safety than be right. They're more concerned about their social circles. That's why people will often be socially accurate, but factually false, because culture and our identity with our friends is so important. You know what I mean? And that's, I look at that, and that's how I make investment decisions.
I do think that's very interesting, and I just remember the Wells Fargo thing about the woman who lied about how much. Yeah, I remember that now.
They fired the employees, not the CEOs or the board members. The people who committed the fraud. They fired the people who were told to do it. That's the problem. Yes,
it's ridiculous, but that is very interesting. Obviously, I am not a financial mogul, so anything I say, definitely don't listen. Shout out, Will. But I do think it's interesting. I'm curious to your thoughts about this, though. When it comes down to, let's say, the big beautiful bill, right? So I read it. I talked about it on my podcast. I talked about this thing sucks so much. But regardless of how much I think it sucks, when it comes down to the current political spectrum, this man Donald Trump has control of control of Congress. So there's a strong chance it gets passed. In a version of it gets passed.
They're gonna pass it. Yeah.
So with that said, another way to kind of look at it is, what do you think about it? The moment it gets passed, you should invest a lot in AI, because the AI stuff in that bill, I personally think, without any background knowledge, just my perception is that when it comes down to the unregulated use of AI inside that bill that will happen for, 10 years, I have a feeling that there's going to be a lot of people investing heavily in AI with its unvetted ability to be used in so many different ways moving forward after that. In addition to the fact that a lot of investment of AI has been had regarding domestically and internationally as well. So I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts about that.
Okay, so quick thing. Anytime it seems so obvious, I get nervous. It didn't seem obvious. In 2022, the stock market, depending on which S&P that they were down 25 and 38%. People didn't want to buy because things were down. When things are up, people naturally want to buy because they feel safe, and other people want to buy. In 2010, you could have bought a house pretty easily, but people were like, I don't know if they'll ever recover. So those are the emotions. I would stay away from something like that because, and then what is the company, or do you buy an index in that area? Right now, here's what I can tell you for certain. The standing of the U.S. government with Trump and the Republicans is now equal, from overseas investors and people, is equal to China. That's how low we've become. We're above North Korea and Russia, but that ain't saying much. We are really frowned upon. We are getting embarrassed because 90 deals in 90 days, we have no deals in 90 days. It's an embarrassment. And now people are gaming Trump. Mark Carney said, if we don't have a deal in 30 days, we're going to raise the tariffs on Trump. Because now they're just having fun. They just don't care because they know he always chickens out. And I actually have a tweet or a text to my friend. I said, on April 7th, that morning, I said, I'm going to buy because his investors are going to force him to chicken out. I said that. I literally have it, and I timestamped. I'll send it to you just off the record. And because the investors pressure, the donors are like, look, I voted for you. Now you're throwing out my employers. You got my stocks down. You got Dave Portnoy saying, I voted for you, and I'm down $8 million. You know what I mean? he hurt him. So that's why he laid off of that, because he's human too. And he likes to feel loved. So he's very easy to persuade into it. So to get back to the point, the money is going overseas. Europe has been awakened because Trump has attacked them and said, you don't spend enough money on defense, you're behind. And 80% of the money they spent was in the US. But at the same time, he's insulting them. So why would you want to buy from the US? So all of these companies overseas are now getting bigger contracts, and Germany has loosened it, and there's now not going to be a surplus, because you can't be a budget surplus all the time. You got to carry debt in order to grow the economy. You got to have the government create money within a certain percentage to then put that money into the economy to resurrect it. And you need people and immigrants to do that. So I believe that you're going to start to see some overseas growth, where if you owned European markets or Japanese markets the last 10 years, you haven't really made much money relative to the US. The US has been an outlier, and things tend to mean revert like this. So if you're jumping on the bandwagon at the top of the mountain, remember, things mean revert. Regression to mean is a statistical fact of life. So when things are really inexpensive, buy. Now, if you bought really inexpensive Europe 5 years ago, you haven't really done well, but that could have been a portion. I did buy a lot in 2022 in ETFs, because you can't really buy a lot of European diversified stocks in the US market, but they paid great dividends and they were peace. Now they're starting to really go up, and I think that's going to help them. So I would rather go with things that I feel comfortable with than guesswork. But if you want to take 80% of your portfolio and have that core strong, then you can do little pieces around it. But I'm a firm believer, like, I can't say this, but there's a company that is launching rockets in this space, 27 a month at least. They're going to have Wi-Fi across the entire country, and it ain't SpaceX. It's Amazon.
I think I
It's
saw
Amazon. Okay.
Yes, that's what I saw.
Okay. Now, but it's quiet. I'm not recommending this. I'm just telling you, they're very diversified. Google, and again, I'm not recommending this. I'm just telling you, they have 150,000 successful drone flights. Did you know that? No one does. And it's for Walmart in rural areas. So think about it. Google is doing all these drones. Who's the number one autonomous car company in the United States, in the world? Google. Waymo. Who's doing quantum computing? Google. Who's got YouTube? Google. Who's got the number one TV service? Google. Who's got a Google? So and they're going to be broken up. That company, again, I'm not recommending this. I'm just giving you the business models are if they were broken up, there's so much value in that, and that allows competition. So to me, if something's done poorly because they've lost 3 consecutive antitrust cases, historically, if you go back to I believe it's 1909, Standard Oil was broken up into like 36 companies. In 1911, one of those companies, after they were broken up, had a patent for years on how to convert kerosene into something, I don't know, you've heard of probably gasoline. But since 98% of Standard Oil's business was kerosene, they weren't concerned about it, because who would want to fool with 2% of their business when 98% was kerosene? So when that happened, that helped take off cars, because it reduced the cost of gasoline, it refined it better, and that allowed the car market to take off. Make sense? Because you all of a sudden, so these are the types of things that when you break companies up, you get tremendous growth, not because of the main business, but because all these ancillary businesses, when they broke up AT&T, they spun off a portion of it and became Motorola and Texas Instruments. That's how the mobile phone came about. When they stopped IBM from owning operating systems, and I don't know if you've heard of this company called Microsoft, that they had to buy an outside operating system, and they couldn't make their own router. So this company called Cisco came about. All these things happen when these companies get broken up. So it could be from inside or outside, but this is a good thing. And I think there's a lot of opportunities in areas that we can't see yet because we don't understand what's going to happen 5 years from now. The question is, what won't change in 5 years? Not what do I think will change? What won't change? Ask that question.
That's an interesting way to look at things. And I do think it's very eye opening considering everything that is happening when it comes to the political system. A lot of people are blackpilled, but when you look at things that are kind of beyond the general, portrayal of kind of media information, there are things that are kind of on the back line that I've obviously have to research since I talk about a lot of these different things. I think recently, I forget exactly what happened, but I briefly saw it where like Chat GPT bought something from the military as well. So I was like, okay, that's interesting. We'll see how that. A lot of this kind of does play into how you can perceive the outlook of the kind of stock market or these different type of trust moving forward. I guess when it comes down to it, when you're talking to the person, this is the last question, then we can start wrapping things up.
Okay.
When you're talking to an individual, this very interesting information and how you have to look beyond what you're told for the most part. How do you get an average person at the very least started? Where is step one for that individual to look towards, building their wealth?
Simplest way. And I want to answer one question on innovation because I like to tell this story, and I'm going to answer that. BYD is making electric vehicles, and we often hear about electric vehicles having expensive batteries and stuff. You can buy a BYD car. I think they make electric vehicles in Mexico now for $15,000 all in. So again, if your Tesla battery is 20,000, BYD's making that battery and the whole car for 15. There is a better way to do it. Isn't that crazy when you hear that out loud? Yeah. So you just replace the car instead of the battery. You get a whole new car. And that's because of automation. Automation will continue. Now they can call it AI or whatever else, but BYD, I believe if I'm correct on this, I believe her name's Hannah. She writes in Substack. They average to produce a gigawatt, is the term, 53 people. Versus most people in China still and other places using 200 people. Automation will continue. It's no different whether it's in the logging industry, how quick things are or anything. So you don't know, but you don't have to be in one industry to make money. You could be in BYD or Tesla or John Deere or Caterpillar or United Rentals. United Rentals is a company that rents equipment to people who can't afford it. They've done spectacularly well. Or Monster Energy. You don't fall in love with companies. Never fall in love. Make investments based on something that you feel like, hey, this could be something, and then let it go. But with your core piece of your investment, you got to be smart. You need to use tax-deferred accounts. And I would tell you, now, granted, I don't do this because I'm a professional, and my job is you're hiring me to do things. But put money in some indexes, the S&P, the NASDAQ, and buy a couple stocks you like. Be diversified. You don't have to put a lot in. Even if you don't have a lot of money, you got a couple thousand. Buy a share of this, a share of that, so you can see how things work and you can learn about it. But every single month, pay yourself first. A Roth, a traditional IRA, put money away. And again, I'm not recommending any of these stocks. Buy a little Amazon. Maybe it's up, maybe it's down. Again, I'm not recommending that. I'm just using this as an example. Buy them every single month and you'll start to catch the ups and downs. And then if something happens where a stock falls low, maybe you take a look at it again, give it a second set of eyes. Say, oh, okay, this company I think is going to turn it around. And then you can, and then write out a process. I always tell this to investors. I have a very event-driven process. Events will happen. There will always be something that is unexpected. That's how I take advantage of it, whether it's the fertilizer companies shooting up when Russia invaded Ukraine. They're nowhere near those prices that they were. Because when events happen, it causes chaos in the markets. And chaos is how you sell at tops and buy at bottoms. because people get too euphoric on one side and too pessimistic on the other. That is behavioral psychology and finance. That's what I do for people. So just dollar cost average in, and then if something happens, you might want to take advantage of it. That's what I try to relay to people. Or if you hear about something, but don't try to be too cute. That's one of the mistakes we make, is we try to overthink things. Just diversify, S&P, maybe a little international. Don't buy country specific unless it's like Japan or South Korea, or you buy that area. It's very hard to do that because they're much, much smaller. Japan's got about 120 million people, and they have a aging population, so it's going to be hard for them to grow. South Korea is similar. The more developed countries have less birth rates. It's hard for you to grow rapidly when you have low birth rates. That's why immigration is so important in the United States. It's the key driving our country, and we get the best people here. So that's what I would do. I would diversify, add it, see the wealth accumulate, see it grow, and when it goes down, buy a little more. You're always buying a little bit every month. That will start to feel good because you'll start to notice it. But don't look at it too often either, because that's a mistake a lot of men can't handle. Women are much better at investing. They don't get emotional about this stuff. Men tend to be very emotional. Why is it going down? Like, if it always went up, nobody would never not buy. You'd never get a deal, right?
That is correct. All right. So we're wrapping things up. So a couple more, end of podcast questions. First question is, if you had to summarize like the important strategies that you were listening today in this conversation in a elevator pitch to the average person, how would you quickly describe how to weigh, not only how to perceive the current, not even current, just general economy or general kind of stock market, and then how they should think about it, how should they perceive, how should they kind of start doing what they're doing? How would you elevator pitch summarize it for them?
I think it's going to be challenging. I think the economy is very challenged. People aren't going to feel as comfortable investing in the U.S. When I say people, I mean a lot of nations are not going to be very open to working with us because the shine of attacking our closest allies, attacking Canada on Twitter, on social media, and all these other things is not how you build relationships. And Elon, being so close to them, he personally attacked Carlos Slim, who was a billionaire in Mexico, and that man canceled his Starlink contracts. You can't argue with everybody and win friends and influence people by being their enemy. You win people over by being their friend. And this administration constantly attacks people. So you have Mark Rubio telling all the France and England and Germany, they're bums, but then I want you to buy our planes. It's like, that's not how you build friendships. And you win by being close to people and being their friends. So I think the United States is going to pay a penalty. That's why our dollar's gotten weaker. That could create opportunities and diversified overseas. But don't make the decision to put everything overseas or everything here. Be diversified. That way, if something happens and one goes up and one kind of comes down, you're learning, but you're also not being overly weighted to one area over another. That, to me, I think we're going to have challenging times. Immigration is the key to growing the economy. So our GDP does appear to be shrinking. I'm not saying we're going to have a recession, but we could have very low GDP. And when that happens, you have higher unemployment. And when higher unemployment happens, you tend to have a slower economy. They kind of go hand in hand together. And so unemployment's going up and you have the economy slow, and then stocks tend to go down before that. There could be a lot of opportunity, but typically you also tend to have bad things happen. I'm very concerned about the economy. I have a larger portion of my money than ever in history overseas, and I have it diversified. Even if you put it in government bonds overseas, and I'm not recommending any of this, I'm just using this. If the dollar weakens, you make money just off the currency. And if you're flying overseas, and a lot of my clients fly overseas, they notice they're telling me, "Oh, Bill, I can't believe it. The dollar is so weak. What's going on?" And again, you know how they voted, and you don't want to say the obvious thing out loud because you don't want to make someone feel bad or ignorant. But you can loop that into a conversation. But I am deeply concerned, and I think it's going to be challenging over the next year and a half. To your point about the big, beautiful bill, which I didn't answer yet, if you kick people off of Medicaid in 4 years, then they're just going to blame the Democrats because they don't even know that people still say, I hate Obamacare, but I love the ACA. Right? You've heard this. You know that.
Yeah.
And they blame the inflation on Biden, yet, and again, I can't stand Trump, but the US government printed money in April and May of 2020. Trump had nothing to really do with that. He just running around saying drink bleach and stuff like that. But that was done because we didn't know what to do, and that helped us get out of the difficulties quicker, but it also caused inflation to go higher because it's like flooding your house with water, and then the guy runs out the house, and then the person who moved in is like, oh my God, the house is soaked, and everybody blames the person who moved in, which was Biden. So he got the blame for it and the narrative behind it, but he didn't necessarily cause it. The economy, if it grows at 5% and inflation's at 3%, you don't really have inflation issues. But if you grow the money supply by 27% in 1 year, you have a lot of water that you got to get out of the system. So a 5 or 4% GDP takes time to pull the extra money out of the system. And we did, but it takes years. It doesn't have, so that one quick printing was COVID related, and it caused Biden to get the blame for that. And companies took that money and they used that extra money people had and they inflated prices. It was greedflation. So I think we're going to have some challenges. I think this bill is terrible, but that doesn't mean it hits right away, because if they can delay it 2 or 3 years, then people will say, oh, my hospital's closing under Joe Biden or Kamala. They'll blame that person. So a lot of times it's very deceptive and misleading. So I don't know what happens, but I am deeply concerned, and I hope that enough people will be upset and awakened, which we've seen in protest, where they'll actually, the gap between the wealthy has never been this high in the United States, and it's our history. It's like it's back like the 1860s, the 1890s with the robber barons. So to me, I don't know what happens, but the wider this moat gets, the more challenging our economy will be, because the top don't pay taxes and the bottom pay it all.
Yeah.
So I am concerned. It doesn't mean companies and individual stocks can't do well, but it will be harder when people at the bottom can't afford anything and you've taken away all of these benefits to help them. Walmart gets the number one beneficiary of food stamps. And then so they pay their people less money, and then 90% of the people that work there who get food stamps spend it in Walmart. So they're corporate welfare queens who hate the people that they get the free benefits from. So anyway, I'm deeply concerned about the economy.
Yeah, it's so unfortunate. Like, obviously, the average person, I always try to mellow my expectations for them. I don't expect them to understand all this stuff. Working a full job, a full family, sure, whatever.
That's exactly right.
But the people who say they know all this stuff,
yes,
pushing out all the wrongful information, I have no sympathy for them. And like, everything is within context at the end of the day. Obviously, I've talked about it. You just mentioned it. It's super irresponsible to think that it's Joe Biden's fault in terms of what happened with the economy. But even with something like this, even though I rag on this podcast a lot on Donald Trump, because I don't like that guy. Yeah. I rag on him a lot. I even brought this up when I was talking about it. I was like, bro, the stuff with the egg prices, I'm gonna be honest, it has nothing to do with Donald Trump. It's correct. Like it was a whole bird flu epidemic, but then prices go back to normal. Look what Donald Trump. I'm like, oh, see, this is why we gotta put things into context. Like, there's outside factors that the president of the United States can only do so much. Now, I will say this current president is trying to do a lot that other presidents should not be doing. So he has more of an impact on the economy than I've seen any president in my lifetime. But with that said, everything is within context once you really deep dive these situations for sure.
But people want to identify with their group.
Yeah.
And when he says it's going to be tight, it's going to be challenging, they're like, okay, I'm going to buckle down for him. But if Joe Biden did it, they don't have any patience for that. So a lot of that has their group identity because they want to fit into their group. Like you said, I think ground beef is higher than it's ever been. And I heard people complaining it's so expensive. And now they're quiet because they're not hearing about it. Look at the price of a turkey. Look at the price. And they're not hearing about it. So it's not on their mind. And
yeah,
so the group identity is such a big thing for so many people because they feel like if you attack the group, you're attacking them. It's called identity fusion and identity threat. They feel like, and you're not attacking them, you're trying to get it open and open them up. But a lot of people don't want to think because cognitively it's a strain to rewire your brain to think the right way, which is deeper thought. It's hard because, like you said, you have your kids, you're running them to school, you want to have fun and watch a game. You want to take a break from the mind. You've been working all day. So I get that. So you got to have empathy for people and patience up to a point. And from there, you kind of determine if you can move them a little bit, then that's a good thing. And that's someone worth investing in. But someone who does not want to be open-minded, then you don't want to invest in them. And that's no different than the markets or anything else. You want companies going to the future, not in the past.
100%. I agree. With that said, we are wrapping things up. Any final thing you have to say? Anything you got to plug, of course, for today's episode?
You can find my website at willryoung.com. I have a book coming out really to help block out the noise. It's based on stoicism and the markets, but it's really not about the markets. It's about finding what your goals are and then tuning out all of that outside noise to achieve what's important to you for your financial well-being and for your financial health and wealth. Because wealth, wisdom, and virtue, those are the things that we all seek. Wealth, though, is a different definition for everybody because it's not about having trillions of dollars or billions. It's about financial independence, typically for most of us. And the wisdom to know what is enough. What is enough? Having these definitions. Wealth is like seawater for a lot of these billionaires. The more they drink, the thirstier they get. Trust me, I've drunk enough seawater surfing. It doesn't quench your thirst. That's why you need to have some values, and writing them down is not fun at first, but once you do it, you start to realize, hey, this is who I am because you're putting it down on paper. And once you put it down, your thoughts to paper, you've taken the initiative to change your life. And then, of course, virtue. What do you stand for? And morally. And that's one of what the Greeks taught many years ago. Moral excellence. Figuring out what you stand for and who you stand for, and then making wise decisions. These all go together well. And that's kind of something that I think is important. So if you want to find out more about me, I have been in the industry for 22 years. My specialty is behavioral psychology and finance. That's what I love, because everything market-wise is based on the wild movements are all just emotions. There's no reason. We've had some of the craziest, most volatile times in history this year, and that's because investors' emotions have been all over the place because we've had the wildest person with the wildest emotions tweeting about it. And, I'm here to help settle those for you if you need that. Definitely enjoy what I do, and I love what I do. And thank you for having me on today.
No problem. I thought this was a great conversation. I definitely agree with how you kind of broken down the importance of establishing values that can, at the very least for me, can establish how the wealth can attribute to the values that you create. I do think that is super essential. For me personally, at the very least, I always try to separate myself from telling people how to live because I know everybody's not the same. But I don't value getting rich that much. I don't value having extravagant things. I'm being honest, even though I don't make a crazy amount of money, I live extremely comfortably. I'm not really panicked or in threat of anything. And that's just because I want to focus on my goals, and wealth can help you achieve your goals, but make sure you have those goals first. Because if it's all just money, we hear it all the time. You see it all the time. People talk about it all the time. This is a common phrase. Money doesn't bring happiness. We hear it all the time, man. So these are important things to consider for
You
sure.
buy you, which could bring some, but it won't fulfill you for life.
For 100%, 100%.
It's a temporary high, though. I would like to have a boat someday.
I'm not mad at you.
Yeah.
I don't mind getting a self-autonomous car where I don't have to drive and I could just chill and just have it drive.
That is something I would love to do. Yeah, just sit there. No one's ever said, you know what? I just want to sit in traffic more.
Yeah, like nobody wants to do that. I was like,
what?
let me read a book a little bit and have my car take me. I'm cool with that. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm definitely there with you, and maybe we could definitely have a conversation again in the future. I would be very interested because I've talked about this before in the podcast, how to do my own research for this one. When I talked about the national debt and people's perception being incorrect about how the national debt is and deficits, I've talked about that. I try to explain that, doing my own research on that. So I'm curious to have a little conversation about that, maybe in the future.
I would love to do that. But I would love to do that. That would be fun because I have this conversation with people. I say, how is money created? And they just look at you like, what? They don't know. And I'm going to do a 4-part series. Other people have done this, but I'm going to do it really with my angle of the psychology behind it. And it's very important for people to know this. They just don't know. And that's one of the failures of our system, is not to explain people how this works. And I hope that this is something that people learn, because once you kind of start to understand, you realize the crypto stuff is really just and I know people get so mad when I tell them this, but it's just a grift. The meme coins are just grifts because you need currency for a country, because you need them to have taxes in order for money to flow through the system. It's just the reality of how it works. And you can't have all these outside currencies, or you'd just be some stateless society. And, we would be North Korea. We could be North Korea or Russia then, where currency doesn't mean anything.
100% with you. People misperceive a lot, and it does fall onto the government too, in terms of the country as a whole, to be able to educate and inform people, because Donald Trump and his MAGA administration realized that there is a vacuum of I'm going to say knowledge. It's hard, but there's a vacuum of knowledge that people don't understand in terms of how elections work, and they don't understand how money works, and they don't understand what these positions even do. So he just comes in, lies, says it works this way, and everybody believes him. I'm like, damn.
It's called the fluency heuristic. People, if you say something a lot, it becomes familiar. And then it's cognitive easy to process, which is called the illusory truth effect, which is the effect of repeating a lie over and over again. People become familiar with it and go, it must be true. Tariffs aren't a tax. I have people who have doctorates who didn't realize that, because he keeps telling them it's not. Why would he lie to me? He's a great businessman. And so, again, flares go off in your brain, and you just can't attack that person because they've been conned. And you know this, we've all know it. We've all been conned before. And when you're conned, the initial reaction is, I haven't been conned. You must be wrong. And then you get mad at the person telling you. And it's no different than if you fall in love and someone breaks up with you, or you find out they're cheating on you. This is a perfect example of emotion. The person who tells you they're cheating on you, your friends, you get mad at them. You don't know her, you don't like her, and then the next thing you know, you find out 6 months later, you're like, I'm so sorry. Once you put that into perspective, that's how you start to have these better conversations with people. But sometimes the person will say, you still shouldn't have told me. And, you just have to move on from those people. You have to figure out they're the weeds in your garden and move on.
That's why I'm trying to have a little grace. Of course, I'm very irritated with all the certain things that prolific media personalities have said in this upcoming election. But I'm trying to have some grace for the people who are now saying, I'm sorry, I voted for Trump. I was wrong about Trump. Like, I really want to say I told you so, but I'm just a
But
little.
we need them. We really
Yeah,
do need them.
we do.
And if we can bring them into the fold and not make them feel stupid, no matter how mad we are, then we can keep them in the fold. But if we make them feel dumb, they'll drift back to that. At least once they get to a certain point, they're safe. But it's that conversion process where they got to be in the fold long enough. You know what I mean? And then they'll start to
Yeah.
realize, God, I can't believe how stupid I was. But if you tell them that, it doesn't work. They
They're
have
not
to
gonna
tell.
listen.
Yeah.
I try to tell people on like the far left all the time, even though I criticize MAGA a lot. I criticize the far left a lot as well. I tell them all the time that y'all gotta calm down. The more you guys keep on attacking these people, they're gonna keep on drifting that way. We don't want them to drift that way. We don't want them to go to the right. So I try to explain
Understand.
that to them all the time and
Yeah.
help them understand. But
Charisma works too. We need someone charisma. We need real charisma. And
hey, Gavin Newsom is doing a lot of good stuff recently with his own.
he has
charisma, not
he
gonna
has
lie.
charisma. There are a lot of issues, but he gets
Yeah.
out there and he challenges Donald Trump. And yes, the charisma matters. Obama had so much charisma.
Obama had.
I mean, he just walk in a room and you listen to him. You're like, he tell a story, and you're like, oh my, he was a great storyteller. Regardless, there's a lot of issues I have with the ACA, and we have to go, but he's a great storyteller, and he's charismatic, and people are just like, yes, again, that's what you need. You need a leader who's charismatic, and then people will follow. That's what you need. We just haven't had it.
Right.
He was good. He was good. Why didn't he get up there, start talking? You're like, yes. Oh, do I agree with that? I'm not sure, but it just sounds good.
Obama talks very well, very convincing, very relatable. Yeah, Obama is, he was something else. And maybe it is Gavin Newsom. Recently, he just challenged JD Vance to a debate. I don't think Vance is going to accept personally, but
Vance isn't that smart. Vance is a dumb.
I agree. But we'll see if that kind of plays out. And then obviously we still got the rising up and comer AOC, but a lot of people don't like her for other reasons. So we'll see how that kind of plays out as well. But with that said,
she'll be president one day. I absolutely believe that.
She's very young. She has a lot of time.
She is young, but she's building the coalition, and she's had to fight so many fights because the old Democrats, like you have Cuomo right now, who got an endorsement from like Clyburn, I think, from South Carolina. And you're thinking like, this guy's a crook. And you just like, because people don't want to break up with the old guard, but the young guard has to come in to change things. It just has to. You can't just keep
And
rolling
we're
out.
seeing the old guard. I'm sorry to say it so bluntly, bite the dust quite a bit. The amount of old guard that have died while they're in office is kind of insane.
Yeah. They gave that seat, instead of the AOC, they gave it to a person who died 4 months later.
It's like
It's just spiteful.
it doesn't make sense. It's
It
like,
doesn't.
okay.
She's the
All right,
future. He's the past. Anyway, have a good evening. Thanks for your time. And hey, if you have any questions, always shoot an email to me, text. I had a great time, and we'll definitely do another one. Think of some topics like the money supply or things like that, and how money works, and we'll do that because I'm going to do a series on that, and I think it's very important people know that. That is a basic economics 101.
All right, excellent. Well, with that said, appreciate everybody who listened to the podcast. If you enjoyed, make sure to rate it 5 stars, share with your friends and family, of course. And all the links, all the information from both him and myself should be in the description as well. With that said, hope you guys enjoyed. Y'all have a good one. Take care and peace.
Thank you.